to another episode of HR and Payroll 2.0. I'm Pete Tiliakis, and as always, I'm joined by the legendary Julie Fernandez. Welcome, Julie.
Thanks, Pete.
Yeah, and you
Great to
brought
be back.
company.
I did bring company.
Yep.
And it's not somebody unfamiliar to our podcast either.
Yes. We've welcomed Dave Polacheck back to the show. Welcome, Dave. We're excited to have him here. He's a veteran of the show, and we're going to be talking some new research and some leave pain points, which is our favorite subject here at the HR and Payroll 2.0. So, welcome, Dave.
Thank you. Yeah, interesting topic. Look forward to talking with you guys.
Yeah, good to have you, man. It's we were opining before this, before Julie jumped on. Wish we'd recorded it, so hopefully we'll be able to bring some of that into this. And always good to have you guys on. I know you've got some new research that maybe some of our listeners might have even participated in. I'm excited to share that.
That's right. And thank you if you did. What's interesting about this leave topic is it actually was born out of a payroll survey that we did a little while back, maybe the end of 2021, early 2022. And one of the findings in that payroll survey, which was a lot more extensive than the ones we're doing now, was the number one pain point, like the single number one pain point for payroll was leaves and absence. And I mean, rocking it. It was 60% of folks said that. It was twice as much, like 2x what anyone else, was calling out as a pain point, including, the whole host of really crazy things that payroll deals with, unions or variable pay, and like just a lot of really complicated stuff. And yet leaves and absence were clearly front runners in the pain area.
Oh yeah, this is historical. I mean, I would have said the same thing as a payroll leader, and I would have said it was the same. I've never. Let me actually rephrase it too. I would have said that as a payroll leader, and then every Fortune, whatever number you want to put on it, organization that I ever worked with from a transformation perspective, there was never one that said we're really good at leaves. Leaves are not a problem. It always was in scope, and it was always how can you help us with leaves. Now, a lot of times it fell out of scope because there wasn't a lot of great resources for it back then. But the point is this has historically been a pain in the ass for a lot of organizations.
That's right. That's right. And actually, as a result, the things that are the biggest pain in the ass out there are areas where advisors get involved in helping solve problems. And so I thought it would be a cool combination to share not only some of the snippets from our Leave Pain Points survey findings, but then interweave stories from the trenches, right?
Yeah.
As you know, like we work with practitioners and solving practitioner issues regularly. And we've had a whole lineup of leave clients, and Dave's led many of those. And so we thought that would be a great combination to show some of the research or talk about some of the research, and then have Dave bring some of it to life through some of the client engagements that are happening out there.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, and I would just point out that I think, a lot of this, payroll comes at this largely from a compliance and a policy sort of perspective, but this has so much, I believe, and have seen so much implications on the employee experience. And their families in some cases too. So this to me is a really critical part of the employee journey that you got to get right, and the experience really is never very good. So
that's right.
I think it's also there's opportunities to improve it right now. So every leave team we talk to is kind of sheepish about it, about how painful this process is, and we're like, guys, you're in great company.
Yeah,
nobody feels great about their leave process. But it is such an intimate process where you're involving potentially an employee's family members. If those are the folks you're communicating with during the process and everything, and getting it right, obviously really matters at a moment that matters, to use kind of the design thinking language for it.
Yeah. The other layer in this too, I always forget or just sort of thought of is, when it comes to leaves, often it's not one of those things where like payroll, where you could look at it and say, okay, we can probably harmonize a lot of what's going on here from a payroll perspective. Sometimes with leaves, you can't do that, especially if you have CBAs or you've acquired companies or you've grandfathered certain things. I find that the rules tend to be kind of all over the road. So it's often hard for HR to really get their arms around some sort of a standard process, if you will.
Yeah. Well, so here's what's interesting. So we've been doing these mini surveys instead of, any kind of full blown heavy lift lately. And that means if we're asking, 10, 15 questions, trying to keep it targeted, and this one on leave pain points, selfishly, what we really wanted to know was, wow, that's an interesting finding that it's 2x more, painful than anything else. Why is that, or what makes it more painful? And you can brainstorm a whole list of things. You've already started, right? There's compliance that's like whack-a-mole and it just keeps coming. There's technology, there's all these different factors. And so we started the survey with a whole host of factors that we typically hear are contributing to making leaves and absences so painful. And to me, the first finding was, maybe counterintuitive. I'm not sure what I expected. A very frequent answer was technology, making it painful. But in aggregate, across the categories, far and away, the single biggest source of pain were process
Oh
areas.
yeah.
And people, of course, there were elements of people and coordination and all the handoffs and things that have to happen, people that have to be in the know and how to make that happen. But I'm not sure, when you think about the landscape and the fact that folks are inclined to go solve with technology or drive to automation, that the process piece doesn't get left out a little bit, right? And Dave, I thought that would be a great place to start, as far as what you're seeing in some of these engagements and the extent to which, people, process, and technology are all intermingled, in what the clients are trying to solve for.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think the challenge that we have is that when we think about process, we think about something that's linear. It's a workflow. It has a initiation point and an end point, and you work your way through. And as Pete and I were talking about before we started recording, is the idea that we normally design these processes for how they're supposed to work step by step, assuming one path from beginning to end. And then afterwards, we go through and say, where are the places where it might go wrong, where we might need to make a correction or fix history or whatever. And then we account for that in permissioning certain users to go back and fix history. This linear process mindset just doesn't work for leaves, because it is a normal part of a leave that somebody goes out on what we think is going to be a workers' comp leave, and that takes it down to very specific path with specific compliance requirements, and then all of a sudden it flips midway through and it's some other kind of leave. Or for another person, it's really how they're planning to exit the organization. They just didn't tell us, so they figure out how to orchestrate a leave, and it ends up being an exit. And so just the variability in what happens during the process, coordinating with medical providers, all this stuff makes it such a challenge. And so technology definitely can play a role in improving it. I know we'll probably get into a handful of different technology topics, both from a positive standpoint, and in some cases we've seen from a negative standpoint, over engineering. On the positive side, we're seeing some great new providers out there. Pete and I were talking about how some of the providers offering technology for leave management today have really just flipped their back office products as a TPA or a carrier, saying, well, maybe there's an opportunity for us to sell licensing to our back office software to clients, and we'll build some kind of an experience layer that'll be light for their employees and call it a product. And that shows, right? It looks like a back office product. There's a handful of new ones out there, AbsentSoft and others, where they're really designing for the end user experience, whether that's for your leave team, for your managers, for your HR business partners, or your employees. And so technology is now coming up, and I think there's going to be some interesting stuff there. I'll say
Yeah.
one other thing about it is just the idea of over engineering. I've talked to a couple of clients recently. I'm thinking about one in particular where they're using the technology to manage the status in the timekeeping system, whether or not I can log time and the specific categories of time, like for an intermittent FMLA, that I can log time to. And yet, because the process is nonlinear, there's constant corrections that need to be made. And if the frequency of those updates to the timekeeping system aren't keeping up, then an employee does show up to work, and yet the timekeeping codes they need aren't available, or they don't even have access. So this is kind of an over engineering that we see for such a nonlinear process. And I think it's something we're encouraging some of our clients to dial back from, actually.
Yeah, it also means everybody has to have a heightened level of expertise, right, to even know what to choose and pick in that area. And it's such a specialized area with the compliance changing all the time that that's another risk for sure when you see that
Yeah,
with your
absolutely.
clients.
Guiding employees as they initiate their leave, or maybe it's their manager, HR business partner, making sure that whatever initiates the leave is uh, is really designed for the knowledge and understanding of the person that's going to be doing it. And if that's a frontline employee, I'm thinking about a retail client, where, just the expertise, the education level of their frontline employees, they're not going to be able to interpret a lot of big compliance words. They just need a basic process map that says, are you sick? In what way are you sick? Or what's going on? And asking more simple questions. So how it gets initiated, I feel like is a big part of it.
Have you ever wondered what really makes a generation tick? Who gets to pick the name? And why the slang keeps changing? Don't worry, I can help. My name's Dr. Megan Grace. On hashtag Gen Z, I share the voices and experiences of Generation Z, how they're different from other generations, what moves them, and why they do what they do. In each episode, we go beyond the buzzwords and the stereotypes to dive into real conversations and the insights that matter to making intergenerational collaboration a reality. You can catch hashtag Gen Z on the Work Defined Podcast Network and wherever you listen to podcasts.
Yeah. Technology's been, I mean, we've talked about this before, Julie. Technology's been a bit of a gap for this process as well. It's not that the HRIS couldn't handle, or the HCM now couldn't have handled the transactions. They do perfectly. It's connecting all the stuff that has to happen, to Dave's point, all the variables that go on outside that are non-HR related, but trigger and are a part of the experience. That orchestration between all that is what's missing. And that's where I think employees get frustrated with, and the handoffs and the HR gets frustrated too, right? And it's hard to create a good experience when you can't have all those systems and processes and things working together.
Yeah, there's such an interwoven ecosystem as well that really involves the carriers, as Dave mentioned.
Yeah.
Folks that are, providing these services have some of those systems, and ideally intertwine them with services, so that an employer can just say, "Yeah, okay, not me. You just handle this for me." But that's not everybody's place. And as shared services are growing and different activities are coming into the folds of shared services, everything about this solution and how you're going to deliver the services gets intertwined with who's doing what and how much is the carrier doing. Am I just looking for a technology to help my internal folks deliver leaves, or am I looking for a third party administrator that is processing the leave itself and also doing some of that administration and feeding it back?
Yeah. Yeah. But even just little things like facilities being engaged for equipment returns or building access or other things around the experience, right? Even beyond the carriers and the external third parties that might need the data. Internally, sometimes those pieces and parts aren't maneuvering together. They're happening by a pull or some sort of a manual interaction. So that's where I think balls get dropped and communications break down as well, and that experience gets crappy for the employee.
Yeah, we had some interesting findings in that area, specifically around the process and the
Yeah.
owners of different parts of that nonlinear journey that Dave is describing. And I think what's really crazy about that, and what are the findings that we had showed, were that there's a lot of focus on the specialized knowledge teams that need to be involved. That's your third party, your carrier or your third party administrator who's doing that, your specialized leave teams, but that's not all of the story, right? And so when we were looking at our survey, we had considerations for the payroll team and for the IT team and for the local business partner and the manager and even automation or bots, and in effect, almost a third of the activities in processing, can fall into those other categories of folks. And so it's very hard to craft an end-to-end delivery model if you're laser focused on the two-thirds that are really the experts and the pros in the space, and the rest of it is feeling some pains because it hasn't been architected to the same degree.
Yeah, yeah, and I think this is where tech, I think, is going to get there to help, right? Because again, if that orchestration is missing, that's where AI and technology and integrations are going to be able to lend that and surface insights to those folks to make them experts, right? Make everyone an expert to be able to get these things done correctly.
Dave, you were working
Yeah.
recently with kind of unwinding or like specifically looking at the delivery model that a client had in this space, and like any observations or things along that journey that stood out at you, or were new findings for them about the operating model and who's involved and how that should all function together.
Yeah. Well, I think like a lot of organizations in our study showed us this, Julie, thinking about the large percentage of the work that's happening outside of the traditional leave teams or their third parties. HR business partners are spending a ton of time on this, and um, putting in technology that provides employees direct visibility, so the transparency of where they're at in the process can defer a whole lot of calls and contacts to your HR business partners in your shared service center around just what's the status of my leave. So that's definitely a big area. I think one of the challenges around this is, as you think about building a business case, saving HR business partner time is a goal that everybody can stack hands on, and yet is hard to quantify in a way that'll actually hit the bottom line, right? There's a lot of, we see lots of funding requests that say there's productivity savings here, and we quantify that to be X number of millions of dollars. And yet, when you say, how will we know we achieved that or not? Well, it's kind of softer savings. And so I think that's one of the challenges. But certainly the technology that provides direct visibility to employees about the status of their leave, that allows them or even their medical providers to fax directly into the system the documentation that may otherwise take, by the time they send it, by the time a person processes it on the other end, a couple of weeks or a week. The stuff that makes the process more efficient and transparent for them, I know eliminates a lot of that kind of field level effort that's
Yeah.
happening.
I feel like sometimes a major challenge in that space is just getting the right level of visibility to the right party, right?
Yeah.
And that's partly a technology thing. Sometimes it's a roles and an organizational hierarchy thing, because that's what technology is reading in order to figure that out. And there's an element of a sensitive nature of the information that I think becomes a limitation to folks feeling like they can really hit a home run in that area. Whether it's the case management or tool that that they need and to share the details with a carrier or the third party, or how does the business partner who's further removed from some of that sticky detail actually get visibility without getting too much, getting things they shouldn't really get their hands on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the design for purpose technologies make a real difference. If you're using, particularly if you're using like a ServiceNow implementation that was primarily for IT as a case management tool, or even if it's for your HR shared services or GBS, and maybe it has some of the right security partitioning you need, when you're pulling on all the medical stuff, and again, the nonlinear idea that like these systems that are designed for linear workflows don't necessarily work well for this. So I think this is where the fit for purpose technology makes a huge difference, as well as the compliance piece, right? Regulations. I mean, we're all seeing it. The regulatory environment is constantly evolving, state by state. In some cases, municipalities or counties. It's a lot to keep track of, and so being able to rely on a tech provider that is either doing their own research or partnered with Littler or somebody else to make sure they stay up to date makes a huge difference. And we've seen that. Actually, we were looking at a couple of different technologies. Um, one being ServiceNow, which of course is this amazing tool with a lot of great functionality. It's a shell in which you can build any process you want, but it doesn't have deep leave management compliance stuff built in. You have to be the expert to build it in. Whereas other platforms, it's more built in. We were talking to PulpStream, which is another kind of process or workflow oriented tool that's not specific to leave management, but they've done a deep dive to make sure that they have all the compliance baked into the tool, and are partnering with experts that keep them up to date. So there's different models to look at, I guess. And part of the question for buyers or for leave management leaders is, can I rely on me and my team to stay up to date and make sure that our platform stays compliant, or do I need a partner who can bring compliance to me and bring those updates to us? So I think there's that's another decision point or decision criteria we see for those in the buying place.
Yeah, there's so the niche tools, right, that are taking an employee experience route are that definitely cool to look at, because they're actually solving from that lens. Um, Historically, I think what we've seen are some of these tools come out of the carriers themselves, and there's been a challenge as you've lived in that world. to have, usually, I think in our survey, we asked how many carriers, right, are involved in the different leave programs that you have. And on average, most folks were in the 2 to 3 carriers across their STD, LTD, all the different programs that they had, workers' comp. And so when you have 2 to 3, up to 5+ carriers, we had almost 10% of folks had 5 or more carriers in this space. And each one might have its own solution for case management and tracking and interacting with you, but any one doesn't solve or give you visibility across an employee who, as you said, is going to wander and take a path from workers' comp to STD to LTD, and their situation is going to move them from one bucket to another, or a couple of buckets simultaneously sometimes, right? And so figuring out how to create that experience and that insight on the back end, so that you can, even your leave team can see it, much less your HR business partners who really want to know what's going on.
Yeah,
Yep.
Julie, do you think there's do you think just in terms of the robustness of the data that comes out of the leave process and all the adjacencies, do you see that customers want to get into that data? I mean, obviously it's great for compliance and other things, but any sort of, I don't say strategic, but maybe workforce planning type activities they can do off of this data?
Hey friends, Marnie Robbins here, host of Vibe Makers, a podcast now on the Work Defined Network. Look, we all know workplace culture doesn't come from a slide deck. Gross. It comes from people. So on Vibe Makers, I talk to the folks shaping the experience of work from the inside out. You know, the HR and people ops folk, founders, leaders, and misfits building culture through small bets, big beliefs, and a whole lot of trial and error. No fluff. Well, maybe a little fluff, but mainly just candid talk about what happens when you stop duct taping your culture together. Come check us out. Listen to Vibe Makers wherever you get your podcasts.
This is William Tincup, and I'd like to talk to you a little bit about Indeed FutureWorks. Ryan and I attended the conference last year, and we created a limited series for Indeed where we talked to their customers. Great stories around TA and how they use Indeed to the max. So check it out. It's just Indeed FutureWorks 2024. You could search for it wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks.
Well, certainly, and Dave might take a
Yeah.
better first crack
Yeah,
at this.
Dave, you may.
Sure.
Yeah, that may be a Dave question, right?
Yeah. No.
What have you seen? I guess is a better way to say it.
Yeah. Well, I think, first of all, just to start with compliance, we're working with a client right now where their compliance savings is going to be the business case to buy this technology.
Yeah.
So, I mean, absolutely, you want to be one step ahead of the class action attorneys and not let them be the first ones analyzing your data through all of your employees that are coming complaining to them.
Right.
So you want to stay ahead of that. But I think that where there's some really interesting data to be looked for is if you can track your processes in a way that lets you do kind of a roll throughput analysis where you're saying, where are the steps of the process where either there's fallout or due to our own administrative lag, we're losing a day here, a week there. And overall, we say on average, our leaves are taking us, 5 days of administrative time added on to the medical causes for the leave. If you have the data to do that kind of analysis, then you have the business case for your improvements. Right?
Exactly. That's
so
great.
We're actually working with that same client where compliance is is probably going to be the name of the game for getting their funding. The other piece of it is looking step by step through their process and seeing where are we losing time because we're not keeping up or because we let the follow up to get medical provider information lag by a couple of days. Does that end up being 2 more days added to the whole leave? That kind of data is really hard to capture if you're tracking this all in spreadsheets or if you're just looking at workday status changes. You really need the process level data to do that. And so that's I think that's key to this.
This to me tells me, we've had a number of guests that, the the overriding message has been, you're not alone, right? So we started this episode by saying, like, if it's ugly, if the baby is ugly, and it's just a complicated process, like you're not alone. And I think even the level of data, we work with clients that have leave programs. They're doing a lot with their leave programs, but because of the way that they're knit together, they can't tell you what their leave volume, you can't with any certainty say exactly what your leave volumes are. with the overlap, or in any, with any great certainty or with any great ease, can you get simple information, much less the really complex information that leave teams really want to be able to do a good job managing leaves and return to works.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
There's a piece of this too, which is we encourage our clients to get into a little bit the research project of what is the cost of an employee being a day away for a day. Because if we can shave a day on average of our leaves, or 2 days or 5 days, to be able to quantify the actual business impact of that, which is a hard research project to do, if we're able to come up with some numbers around that, we can apply that to a lot of other HR initiatives we want to do. You're talking about changing attendance programs. Talking about getting people onboarded quicker, right? That knowing what is the cost to your business of having a job left open, which is the same as having an employee out on leave for an extra day, right? It's a hard research project to do. It's company specific, and in some cases, it's role specific. If a person in accounts payable, let's say, is out for an extra 3 days and their teammates just pick up the volume, there's really not a lot of impact there unless it's being covered on overtime. So it's a hard research project to do, but we see that it can become the business case for a lot of things beyond leave. And so to the extent you can partner with your finance and operations folks to at least get some kind of directional data around the cost of absences, there's a lot you can justify, or a lot of business case you can build out of that for leave management and other areas of HR.
Yeah, agreed. Agreed.
Yeah. While we're talking about data, I did promise to highlight some findings from the study that we had.
Yeah.
And as usual, there's so much to talk about that we're kind of all over the map. But in the data area, we did kind of ask a few questions about the types of data or the things that folks had that would be complicating the leave process. We already talked about a number of carriers. And there's usually, 2 to 3, all the way up to 5 and more. We asked respondents about the number of leave types that they track in the core HR system. And that to me was interesting because some folks will take the approach that, your core HR system is really just tracking on or off a leave, active, inactive, maybe, paid leave or non-paid leave, but really, minimizing the degree to which you're trying to categorize those leaves in a core HR system of record and leave it to your carriers or to your TPAs versus doing it natively. And kind of the right answer, the 2/3 of folks that responded in this survey had 10 or fewer leave types in the core HR system.
Ooh.
And so I
Yeah.
thought that was interesting, right? Because it does mean you're taking a minimalist approach to
Yeah.
the leave status and reason types that are aligned with your payrolls, and letting some of that compliance, heavy lifting, differentiation with the unions, really work itself out in the specialty systems with the expertise that really understands them.
Right. Right. Hey, just to ask you guys maybe a side thing, because I don't study this deeply, obviously. Who is there anybody out there doing anything really exceptional or differentiated right now when it comes to tech or AI around leaves that you know of, Dave?
Well, I'll tell you the one really interesting use case we've been
Yeah.
just talking with Pulpstream about, and this is not something that's even been prototyped yet, but it's an early idea we're brainstorming with them, which is, and this is on, we haven't really talked about the return to work process and ADA accommodations and the interactive
Yeah.
process to get somebody back to work, which is where a lot of the compliance or legal risk comes into play, is the consistency with which your managers, the same manager with the same situation says, yes, I can accommodate, or no, I can't accommodate, or across your organization where different managers making different calls based on the same, light duty restrictions, for instance, is the idea of, can we use technology to look at the history of the types of accommodations we've been asked to make and whether we've been able to grant them role by role, and really getting into the details of, it's a gripping restriction, it's a standing or sitting restriction, it's a frequent breaks, or whatever it is, whatever the restrictions are. Can we analyze that data and provide a recommendation to the manager for the interactive process that they would then have to agree or disagree with, and get better consistency through AI?
Yeah.
And I think there's a real case that this could be done, especially if you start out perhaps instead with just instead of just looking at the history of what you've accommodated and not, also work with occupational therapists, as a lot of companies do, to write up the physical requirements of your more standard roles so that it's an easier question to answer. Can we accommodate this? Well, if the restriction ties directly to a particular aspect of how we've described the job, then it's clear. Yes, we can. No, we can't. So can we mash all this data together? And instead of just throwing it to a manager out in the field saying, can you accommodate this or not? We're also giving them a recommendation. And how much of the risk can we mitigate with that? That's a
Yeah.
really interesting space, I think, that we've not seen executed in technology yet. But as we talk to clients about the possibility of it, it's pretty exciting and I think very doable, actually.
Yeah.
We actually see that coming from multiple dimensions too, because there are parts of that and making that happen that tie to having job descriptions that identify what some of those items might be, right? That ultimately need accommodation for. And so I see this also, being talked about quite a bit in compensation and some of the compensation tools that are aiming to get into AI.
What I love about the Workforce Agility Limited Series by Cornerstone was we talked to executives and customers all about skills. Skills. Cornerstone has a wonderful background in learning and development, training, etc. Their LMS is world class, but they've centered the business now, not just on that, like building upon that, but building upon how everything has moved to the skills economy. So check out the limited series called Workforce Agility, and you can get it wherever you get your podcast. And it's just a wonderful series where we talk to their executives on the shift of why, and also their customers that are using it. So check it out whenever you get a chance. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Yeah. Julie, we've talked a little bit about this, I talked a bit about it earlier about the orchestration of this. And I'm wondering if at some point we're going to get to, and maybe somebody already has it. And by the way, if you're building something differentiated in leaves, get in touch. We'd like to have a briefing and check it out. I study much, deeper on the HCM side and see what they're doing with HR processes. And I think what you're seeing is that this, like, for example, we talked about UKG building their connected agents and off of large action models, where it's weaving together use cases across multiple modules to bring together a single experience for the employee that makes sure they're hitting all the pieces based on the personalization and contextualization of what they're asking. To me, this is a perfect opportunity for leaves. You almost need employees, and maybe even HR and business leaders almost need somewhat like a leaves concierge, right? That is doing all that orchestration and surfacing insights and helping you make good decisions. So hopefully with all the virtual agents and other things we have out there, we're bringing that together for employees. But I'd love to make a call to action here and say, if you're building something cool in leaves, let us see it.
Tell
Julie
us,
and I
yeah.
would love a briefing. So yeah,
Absolutely.
let's check it out and tell the world about it.
I think integration is another topic that comes up quite a bit. And
Yes.
it's another area where there are, multitude of flavors, and a lot of it doesn't depend on your leaf solution, right? You have employee data from your HR system that's needed. You have payroll that has to be in the loop. You have time data for eligibility determinations. You have one or more, carrier opportunities, and all these guys have to pass data. They may be the same system in certain cases or different systems, that have to work. And so data has to jump through many hoops. And we'd asked in our survey, exactly how old is the hours data in particular by the time it gets to, whatever the mechanism is that's doing the eligibility determination. And, the overwhelming answer was that, the data is oftentimes up to a week old or more than a week old. And that impacts some things, especially when you're trying to figure out, have you met days worked requirements, and are you going to be eligible for this activity? Do you estimate what else could have happened in that week, or do you have to wait and delay the process, or how exactly do you make a process more efficient when the data itself is taking so long to make its way through the network or the ecosystem of data that you have set up?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Everything I described would rely almost not entirely, but heavily on integrations, right? And the democratization of data being passed around. So yeah.
And I guess
Totally.
the way that conversation first starts, I'll just pick on Workday because that would still say maybe 60% or more folks in the large market, anyways, are using
Yep.
Workday. Is a Workday, user or a Workday company will come to us and say, "Okay, I have Workday. That's my strategic solution, but leaves is messy. And so how do I, like how do what switches do I flip to make that go better?" And in fact, you don't know when one client may have Workday only for HR, one may have it for HR and payroll, one may have time in Workday. Sometimes the data is going through Workday to a carrier, and sometimes it's going directly to a carrier. And so just even the variations and the number of different permutations of the way data is moving around in these ecosystems is confounding, and it's
Yeah.
very different for every client we work with.
Well, I think your report had what, 3.5 to 4 or so
Yeah,
systems per administration.
that's right.
So that's a lot, right? That's a lot when you're bouncing around all that. You've got to have integration. I mean, if not, get away from having so many systems. So,
Yeah.
Julie, something that jumped out at me on this, and I think it's obviously, I mean, I think it's a very obvious thing, but I saw you had something around half, I think it was less than half of the organizations perceive their organization to culturally prioritize leaves. And it
Yep.
seems like every one of these complicated processes that are often left uncared for, uninvested in, are the ones that the firm struggles with the most. And I almost would say, like payroll and maybe some others, it's almost like the more complex it is, the more it gets neglected. Right? It's like, ooh, it's not my problem.
Yeah, to me
You
that
know?
was a really fun one. In fact, it might have made for a good closer, but let's talk about it now, right? Because we
Yeah.
hear leave folks that are in the trenches with leave saying, "Yes, leave is this is a priority for my firm to to bring people back to work and to follow the talent and to make sure that we're doing everything to enable keeping and using the talent and yet respecting their needs." And you have many other leave practitioners that will say, "My company doesn't care. Like we just want to be compliant and we
Oh
want to
yeah.
follow the rules, and people are probably halfway out the door anyways by the time they're going on a big leave." And the culture in the organization has such an impact. And what I think is actually driving a lot more initiatives around leave today is the impact that COVID had on everyone universally, who in some way, shape, or form stopped work or had work stopped. And every
Yeah.
company had to figure out, what do we do to stop the work and how do we start the work again? How do we get people into the office or have them virtual? And there was like a very generic accommodation, right?
Yes.
Issue that the whole world had to deal with. And it did bring this whole idea of needing to take a leave or be out for a while and then
Yep.
having to figure out how to come back, a much more widely talked about thing.
Yeah, well, let's be fair. In the United States, we've done a horrible job, I think, of caring for workers when it comes to leave, particularly women. Right? I mean, with caregivers and just different situations. I think culturally, we've done a bad job as a society, deprioritizing people taking time off of work, unlike other countries that do prioritize it. So we've got some work to do there, just legally, I think, to make it a bit more accommodating to workers.
That's a great
Yeah.
call out.
Yeah,
I'm amazed at the differences we see as you're talking to the leave teams, those who, and maybe it partly is a factor of industry and volume and turnover, but in some cases you've got folks that are see this as this purely administrative process, a little bit of cat and mouse game of, we're trying to catch employees who are clearly just trying to find a way to slack off. And certainly there's a valid narrative there. I mean, you can go on TikTok and get and figure out how to get any diagnosis you want, right? But then we talk to
Thanks for
other
sharing
teams.
that, Dave.
Yeah, sorry.
Oh my god.
um, so, by the way, I need to take a leave, Julie. I forgot to tell you.
Oh
yeah. By the
geez.
way,
I have an obscure disease. No, but the flip side of it is we talk to some folks who are so deeply caring, who are available to make themselves available to their employees or their managers on off hours to answer random questions and whatnot, who really they see their purpose as being taking good care of these employees, helping them get healthy again, helping them get back to work. And I think there's something about a talent strategy in that, is
yeah,
really thinking about what you're trying to accomplish culturally and making sure you're staffed with folks that have a bit of a caring mindset, because it makes a big difference, and it makes a difference in how your process will go, not just
Oh yeah.
in the tone of communication between your team and your employees.
Yeah, that empathy is a key part of servant leadership, right? I think more organizations are coming around to the realization they've got to be more about removing obstacles and helping employees be their best versus necessarily, coaching them out the door, so to speak. So,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Hey,
good
so I
stuff.
think in one way, shape, or form, we've kind of traipsed across all of the different things that we touched on in the survey, except maybe one of Dave's favorite, which is what about measuring outcomes, or
Yeah,
what are you finding that folks are most we talked a little bit about business cases, because you have to fund what you want to do in some way, shape, or form, but we did get some suggestions, and it was all over the map on how would you define success in this space. What sorts of things have you seen in the field, Dave, that might intersect with just the feedback that we got on measuring outcomes and figuring out success?
Well, I think as we've talked about, the holy grail is reducing time away,
Yeah.
and being able to quantify the value of reducing time away. And so the mechanisms there, as we talked about, there's kind of doing the rolled throughput yield, or just a more kind of subjective process view to see, can we reduce administrative time, or in tightening up our communication with medical providers, can we get people back sooner? If we have more of a case management or medical case management approach, can we get people back sooner? So certainly reducing time away is probably the biggest, but also most elusive, kind of value driver
Yeah.
here. Definitely compliance is a huge piece of it. I mean, it only takes a couple of big settlements or class action suits, or one, to pay for a lot of improvements, whether that's increasing your staffing, buying technology, going to a TPA, to rein in your spending as it relates to leave management. The other levers or impacts that we see is reducing the transactional cost of over and under payments, and then specifically
Mhm.
uncollected, premiums and other things that basically you're not collecting while employees out. Um, there's definitely a big impact there. I'm trying to
Yeah.
think what else.
The other one that I was thinking about as you were talking was, your leave empath, who you just described, is definitely thinking about, customer satisfaction, or, the decrease in time for a decision, those sorts of things that you can maybe measure with an NPS, or, really getting into the employee voice of the employee and how they're experiencing it.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
when you think about it, it's just subjectively, if I've been through one of the hardest moments of my life, and the company showed just the right amount of compassion and made sure I was taken care of until I was ready to come back to work, that the impact on employee experience, my loyalty to the company, is so much greater than if that same kind of care was taken when I wasn't in that vulnerable moment. And so those companies, and I've not seen specific data on this, but those companies that really put the effort to take care of folks while they're out, that empathy component, I would imagine, and again, we don't have data for this, but we'll see an impact on retention. And it would be an easy study to do. It would be to say, for those employees, are those employees that go out on a leave and have a positive experience and then come back, is there greater longevity there?
yeah,
Yeah.
I'd be interested to see that as well.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah,
well, maybe another micro survey,
that's our
right? At
next
some
one.
point
Yeah,
in
that's the
time.
There you
next
go.
one.
Hey, speaking of that, Pete, I think we don't want to wrap up before saying, we're doing these with some regularity. And we're just completing and have finished and are starting to talk about one in the AI for HR space. That could be
Yeah.
cool to do another time. And coming up, our next one will be tapping into some insights around compensation, where there's a
Ooh,
lot of
very
things
good.
happening. And so, um, as you
Yeah.
can tell, like we do like a little 10 or 15 question thing, and it just gets us talking about all sorts of things.
Yeah, these are great. I think the pulse aspect of this is important, right? When you can keep it under that, like you said in the beginning, 10, 12 questions, it's very accommodating for people to jump in there and give their point of view and get out. Cause I agree. I do these for a living, and they do get fatiguing, and I understand that. So, yeah, I love
Yeah.
these little pulse surveys. So
We
yeah.
try. I think the nice thing is too, we try to really lean into actionable things that aren't about benchmarking benefit levels,
Yep.
or what's your STD policy. It's more about what's actionable, what can you do to improve, or what are other people doing that's driving great value. out of their processes. That tends to be kind of our mojo around these surveys, is to figure out what's some applicable advice that I can get from my peers via a survey like this. And hopefully
Yeah.
that's the kind of insight we bring from them.
Yeah, Julie, maybe what we can do is you've got payroll, you've got the leave. You're going to do the comp one. Maybe we do
Yeah.
an experience offshoot from that, like a leave experience, a comp experience,
That
pay
would be
experience,
cool.
and sort of look at where all those things are converging in terms of the user, right? And maybe Dave, we can get some of that as insights you're talking about. So
Absolutely.
yeah, I love
Awesome.
it, man. Thanks for coming on, Dave. This is so fantastic. It's always good to have you.
Yeah, fun stuff. Thanks for
Yeah.
having me.
Yeah, I'll make sure we get your contact info. Look, Julie, where can people get access to these resources?
Well, I think we have the infographic. That's probably the highest level of one that we'll share with you, or you can post wherever you're
Yep.
posting our bits, and you can always reach out to Dave or myself, or out to the network. We're just about on the verge of a website release, so so I expect by the time this airs, you should be able to also find some of these research results at www.heronpalmer.com.
Yeah, awesome. Well, good. Look, Dave, you're always welcome to come on, man. We really appreciate you sharing your insights, and yeah, good talking to you both.
Thanks for everything you're doing.
Thanks, Pete.
Yep. Thanks, guys.